If you if you just step back and really observe the modern world, you run into this, honestly, this profound, almost haunting paradox.
Yeah, you really do.
Because why is it that you and I live in an era of just completely unprecedented material wealth? We have, access to the most advanced medical care in human history, and yet society is desperately, almost frantically searching for healing.
It is the ultimate contradiction of our time. I mean, we've optimized our environments, our logistics, our comfort, but internally, the foundational structure of the human psyche just seems to be, well, cracking under the weight of modern life.
Cracking feels like an understatement when you actually look at the raw data. Like the World Health Organization's projections for September 2025 are staggering.
They are heartbreaking, honestly.
Yeah, we're looking at over 1 billion people living with a mental illness. You've got 5 to 6% of adults facing chronic depression, 4% dealing with anxiety disorders.
And the financial toll is massive, too.
Right. It's costing the global economy $1 trillion annually in lost productivity. And behind those economic numbers is the truly devastating statistic, 727,000 suicides a year.
And if we look at the trajectory, despite a massive influx of modern interventions, we're dramatically missing the UN's targets to reduce those numbers.
Which is wild.
It is. In low-income countries, less than 10% of people get adequate help, which is, a tragedy of resources. But the real mystery is in high-income nations. Treatment is widely available, psychiatric infrastructure is robust, and yet the crisis is still accelerating.
So we have this massive data set showing $1 trillion lost, 1 billion people suffering. And our topic for today's deep dive suggests the reason we can't fix it is because we might be working with a fundamentally flawed model of the human mind.
Exactly.
We keep treating the brain like a biochemical machine that just needs the right data inputs or maybe the right life hacks and dopamine hits to function properly.
And that mechanical view is arguably the root of why the deeper suffering remains untouched. If you treat the human psyche merely as a biological machine that just needs a chemical tune-up when it stutters, you are completely ignoring its original operating system.
Okay, let's unpack this because we're used to the concept of tabula rasa, right? The philosopher's idea that you're born a blank slate and society just writes its rules onto you.
Right, the blank slate theory.
But classical Islamic theology and philosophy introduce a concept called the Fitrah, which, and this is the crazy part, modern neuroscience is now empirically backing up.
Yeah, the concept of Fitrah completely flips that blank slate theory on its head. It posits that you don't arrive empty. Instead, you possess a God-given, innate, and uncorrupted disposition toward virtue, toward truth, and toward transcendence.
So you are preloaded with a specific moral architecture.
Exactly. It's not a blank hard drive. It's a device that comes out of the box with a highly specific operating system already installed.
And here's where it moves from philosophy into, like, hard biology, right?
Yes. When you act in accordance with this innate nature, when you're generous, when you forgive, when you practice gratitude, you create actual neurological harmony. Your brain literally rewards the alignment.
Oh, wow.
But when you act against it, say through chronic greed, arrogance, or just holding on to bitter hatred, you generate massive cognitive dissonance within your own nervous system.
Which has physical consequences.
Huge consequences. Over time, that dissonance manifests physically as chronic stress, emotional exhaustion, and anxiety.
Okay, let me make sure I'm wrapping my head around this. It's essentially like putting diesel fuel into a gasoline engine.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Like, you can try to force it, you can push the pedal to the floor, but the engine's going to choke and eventually just tear itself apart. So these virtues we're talking about, they aren't just arbitrary societal rules to make us, nice people.
No, not at all.
Or the literal biological and psychological operating conditions of the human brain. If you operate outside those specs, the engine breaks.
That analogy hits the nail on the head. And if this innate blueprint, this Fitrah, is truly the universal operating system of the human brain, we shouldn't just see it isolated in one tradition,
Right. It should be everywhere.
Exactly. It should be the common denominator across all of human history.
Which we do see almost everywhere you look. I mean, Prophet Muhammad stated his only mission was to perfect noble character. That implies all the intense rituals, fasting, praying, pilgrimage. They're functionally empty shells if they don't fundamentally refine your character.
And you find that exact same biological imperative globally. Aristotle called it Eudaimonia, true human flourishing.
Right.
And he insisted that cultivating virtue was the mandatory prerequisite for it.
You see with the Stoics, too. Marcus Aurelius wasn't writing his meditations just to sound profound. He was systematically training his hegemonicon, his inner ruling center, to achieve unshakability through character strength.
Yes, and in Buddhism, you have the Brahmaviharas, cultivating compassion and equanimity to escape the cycle of suffering.
And the Jewish tradition has the Mussar movement, which is an entire rigorous discipline dedicated entirely to systematic character refinement.
It's this remarkable historical convergence, but modern psychology took a pretty sharp detour. Today, our primary framework is the DSM-5.
Yeah.
And as a diagnostic manual, it is brilliant at categorizing the symptoms of depression and anxiety. It gives us a precise vocabulary for what the suffering looks like,
Right.
but it rarely, if ever, addresses the deeper moral, spiritual root of that suffering.
It meticulously tracks the smoke but ignores the fire. I mean, we all know the DSM-5 is a vital tool, but it's a manual of effects, not causes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Contrast that with classical scholars like Al-Ghazali from 1,000 years ago. He developed an entire science called Ilm al-Qalb, the science of the heart.
And to Al-Ghazali, the physical brain was just the executing organ, right?
Yes. The true center of the psyche, the command center, was the spiritual heart. He analyzed what he called diseases of the heart, pride, envy, stinginess. He understood back then that if a heart is eaten away by envy, your body perceives a constant threat, which inevitably floods the physical brain with chronic stress hormones. A healthy heart is the absolute biological prerequisite for a healthy mind.
And we really have to ground this in reality because it's so easy to dismiss this as armchair philosophy for people who have, comfortable lives.
Sure.
But look at Viktor Frankl. We all know the horrors of Auschwitz. But Frankl's takeaway from being stripped of his family, his title, and his basic humanity is just profound. He realized the Nazis could take everything except his final innate freedom, the ability to choose his attitude.
Amidst starvation and constant death, Frankl actively chose compassion for his fellow prisoners. He chose inner dignity. He chose to find meaning.
Which proves that character strength isn't some fair-weather luxury you practice only when the bills are paid. It is the ultimate survival tool. It is the load-bearing pillar that prevents the human psyche from shattering under extreme pressure.
It is a profound narrative, but it pushes us to ask a very tangible question. Frankl's story is deeply moving, but what does the hard empirical data say today?
Right.
Like, if you cultivate these specific virtues, does it actually change your cellular makeup and your brain structure?
That is the crucial pivot here. We aren't just talking about feeling a little more optimistic. We're talking about biological architecture.
And the data confirms the architectural shift. In positive psychology, there's the VIA classification of 24 character strengths, which has been utilized by over 35 million people worldwide.
It's like 35 million.
Yeah, it's massive. And a 2025 meta-analysis by Casali and Ferrico isolated these traits and proved that virtues, especially spirituality, gratitude, and emotional regulation, show incredibly strong, measurable correlations with lowered anxiety and depression.
Let's actually break down the mechanisms of how this works, because we can look at 5 specific virtues, contrasting their ancient linguistic roots with modern neurology. Let's start with sabr, which usually gets translated as patience or grit.
Right, but it's much deeper than just politely waiting in a long line at the grocery store.
Much deeper.
Yeah.
Linguistically, the Arabic root means to bind or to endure bitterness without complaining. It is a proactive, conscious steadfastness.
And neurologically, SABR maps perfectly onto the mechanism of top-down regulation.
Wait, so top-down regulation, is that basically the prefrontal cortex acting as like the rational adult in the room?
Exactly.
Like telling the toddler amygdala to calm down.
That is the perfect way to visualize it. When you face a crisis, your amygdala, your evolutionary fear center, sounds the alarm. It floods your system with cortisol and adrenaline.
Right.
But right now, for many of us, the amygdala doesn't know the difference between a literal saber-toothed tiger and an annoying email from your boss. It panics all the same.
Which is exhausting.
Incredibly exhausting. But people who actively cultivate SABR physically thicken the neural pathways between their prefrontal cortex and that amygdala. They train the adult to actively dampen the panic signals.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Yeah, they widen what psychologists call the window of tolerance. And the 2025 research shows this exact neural mechanism is the mandatory prerequisite for post-traumatic growth. You don't just magically grow from trauma. The cultivated character strength of SABR is the engine that processes the healing.
So SABR stops the bleeding. It stops the panic. But just surviving isn't thriving. How do we shift the baseline from just enduring the storm to actually feeling a sense of abundance? That brings us to gratitude, or shukr.
Yes. Linguistically, the root of shukr carries the imagery of an udder filling up with milk. a physical manifestation of abundance. The ancient promise is that gratitude actively brings more abundance into your life.
And scientifically.
Scientifically, we look to Robert Emmons, the pioneer of gratitude research. His longitudinal studies prove that a conscious, daily practice of gratitude dramatically lowers cortisol reactivity.
And let's look at how it does that, because evolutionarily we are wired with a negativity bias, right? We are built to scan the horizon for threats, not for beautiful sunsets.
We are. But fMRI scans show that practicing gratitude physically rewires a network in your brain called the reticular activating system, or the RAS, along with the ventromedial prefrontal cortex.
The RAS is basically the bouncer of the brain, right?
Yeah.
It filters what information gets led into your conscious awareness.
Exactly.
It's like when you buy a red car and suddenly you see red cars everywhere. The cars were always there, but your RAS is now programmed to let them through.
Yes, and to build on that, when you cultivate shukr, you are reprogramming the bouncer to look for positives, for safety, and for connection. It's not a fleeting good mood. It's a permanent neurological filter you build to combat the negativity bias.
Which perfectly sets up the third virtue, compassion, or Rama, because if your RAS is finding the good and you feel abundant, you naturally have the capacity to extend that outwards.
The linguistic root of Rama is beautiful. It shares the exact same root as the word for womb.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it implies a deeply connected, nurturing, unconditional love that provides a safe environment. And science explains this through Stephen Porges's polyvagal theory.
I love polyvagal theory, but the vagus nerve sounds very abstract.
How does feeling compassion physically alter the body?
Well, the vagus nerve, the name actually means wanderer. It connects your brainstem to your heart, your lungs, and your gut. But Porges discovered that the ventral branch of this nerve is actually connected to the muscles of your face and your vocal cords.
Really?
Yeah, this forms our social engagement system.
Wait, so it's not just a feeling in my chest, it's physically linked to how my face moves.
Exactly. When you practice genuine compassion, your facial expressions soften, your vocal tone changes, and you make safe eye contact. This massively stimulates that ventral vagus nerve, which acts like a biological emergency brake.
That's incredible.
It floods your body with oxytocin, synchronizes your heart rate, and literally pulls your entire nervous system out of chronic fight or flight. Compassion is quite literally the strongest biological antidote to chronic exhaustion. But, let's be real for a second. Extending compassion gets you hurt sometimes. We have all been profoundly wronged by someone. What happens to the body when you hold on to that? Let's talk about forgiveness. Alafu.
The linguistic root of alafu means wiping away a footprint in the sand, as if it never existed. It's the total erasure of a grudge.
People always say holding a grudge is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. But looking at the data, that is literally happening at a cellular level.
It really is. Holding on to chronic hostility skyrockets what we call your allostatic load. That's the constant wear and tear on your organs from your engine running too hot.
So it's breaking down the machine.
Yes, it drives up silent inflammation in the body. Neurobiological studies show that letting go of a grudge through forgiveness directly increases your vagal tone and visibly reduces inflammatory markers in your blood, like C-reactive protein.
Wow.
So forgiveness isn't just a moral gift to the person who hurt you, it's a radical biological detox for your own tissues.
So forgiveness gets our baseline back to neutral by clearing the poison. That leaves generosity, Karam, to push us into the positive.
Right. Karam means to be noble and generous. It is the active cure for stinginess. In behavioral economics, they track a biological reaction called the warm glow effect.
Which is the difference between buying a $5 coffee for yourself versus buying one for the stressed-out stranger in line behind you.
Exactly. Neuroimaging proves that when you spend resources on others, it lights up your ventral striatum, specifically a region called the nucleus accumbens, far more intensely and for much longer than if you spent that same resource on yourself.
And I think the coolest part of the research is that this isn't just some Western high-income phenomenon.
Not at all. A massive study spanning 136 countries proved this is a universal human trait. From the richest nations to the poorest, generosity is consistently associated with higher well-being. Your brain is not wired for selfish hoarding. It is neurologically hardwired for generosity.
Okay, let me pause you because I have to play devil's advocate here with some crucial pushback. We are talking about character as medicine, which sounds incredibly empowering. But does this mean if someone listening has severe clinical depression or they are suffering from complex PTSD, that it's just a moral failure?
Oh, wow.
Like, is a chemical imbalance just a sign that you have a bad character? Because that sounds incredibly toxic.
I am so glad you brought that up because that is a dangerous and fatal misunderstanding of the science. We have to draw a very clear clinical distinction.
Okay, good.
Character strengths are your preventative shields, and they are your resilience accelerators. But they absolutely do not replace clinical, psychiatric, or pharmacological intervention when a structural collapse has occurred.
How do we reconcile that?
Think of it this way. Refining your character and building virtue is like meticulously weatherproofing your house. It makes the walls strong, the roof secure against the storms of life. But if a massive earthquake has already leveled the foundation, say your thyroid completely fails, or your brain architecture is highly disorganized from severe childhood abuse, you can't just live, laugh, love your way out of the rubble.
You can't just positive think it away.
No, you need medical emergency tools, perhaps heavy machinery, to pour a new foundation first. True wisdom is integrating both. Even ancient religious texts explicitly command seeking medical help for physical illness.
That makes perfect sense. The earthquake requires heavy machinery, but you still need a good roof for the daily weather. And what's fascinating is how far into the future that roof protects your family. The research gets into epigenetics here, and it just blew my mind.
The generational echo. The research of Rachel Yehuda at Mount Sinai Hospital is groundbreaking here. She studied Holocaust survivors and their children.
Yeah.
Her work in transgenerational epigenetics shows that trauma, extreme stress, and chronic hostility actually altered DNA methylation.
That's breakdown methylation for the listener. It's not mutating the actual DNA code, right?
Yeah. Correct. It doesn't change your genetic sequence. The letters of your DNA stay the same. Instead, methylation adds a chemical tag to the gene that acts like a volume dial.
Okay.
Severe trauma can turn the volume up on a stress response gene, making it hyperreactive, and that altered volume dial can be passed down to your children.
But the crucial thing here is that it's the response to the trauma that gets written into the genetic code.
Exactly. Which means when you actively work on your character, when you process your trauma through Rama, compassion, when you establish resilience through shukr, gratitude, you are physically altering your own epigenetic tag.
You are turning the volume down.
You are turning the volume down on the stress response. You are writing a biological legacy of resilience into the very cells of your descendants. Your character today is the biological starting capital for your grandchildren.
That is just staggering to think about. To realize that my patients today, how I handle an annoying email, could literally protect my unborn grandchild's nervous system decades from now. It changes everything about how we view inner work. It's not just self-help, it's ancestral stewardship.
It elevates character development from a personal hobby to a generational responsibility.
Which brings us to the most important part, the application. If you're listening to this and thinking, okay, I'm sold, but how do I actually do this? How do we move from intellectual understanding to actual neuroplastic rewiring in our daily lives? The science points to a 3-step action plan.
Let's walk through it. Step 1 is muhasabah.
Right, muhasabah translates to radical self-reflection. Think of it as a daily audit of your heart. Before you go to sleep, you look back at your day without self-hatred, but with total, brutal honesty.
Just objective observation.
Yeah. You ask yourself, where did my amygdala take over today? Where did pride dictate my actions? Where was I stingy with my empathy? You can't fix a neural pathway that you refuse to acknowledge exists.
And once you identify the pathway, step 2 is the 40-day process. The Islamic tradition has long used a 40-day rhythm for spiritual resets, and modern science aligns beautifully with this timeline.
How so?
Philippa Lally's research at University College London found that it takes roughly 66 days of consistent practice to build a new habit.
Why does it take that long?
Because neuroplasticity requires physical material. Your brain has to wrap myelin, an insulating sheath, around the new neural pathway to make it fast and automatic. That biological construction takes time.
So you can't rush it.
No. The key here is intense focus. You don't try to fix everything about yourself at once. You pick one virtue, say consciously holding back your anger, and you force the brain to physically build that new road through consistent daily repetition over those weeks.
And step 3 is soba. If you step back, you realize you can't do this in a vacuum. Soba means a transforming community. You cannot form your character in isolation.
It's biologically impossible.
Right. Your nervous system literally requires co-regulation. You need to be around people who are striving for those same ethical goals, whose very tone of voice and eye contact calm your vagus nerve and model the behavior you're trying to learn.
We are deeply social creatures down to our neurons. The company you keep is the environment in which your brain rewires itself.
So Bringing this all together, it seems incredibly clear that the artificial separation of spiritual ethics and modern medical science was a massive mistake. Virtues aren't just these dusty old rules designed to make sermons sound good.
No, they're tools.
They are highly effective, precision biological instruments. They calm your vagus nerve, they lower systemic inflammation, and they act as a physiological shield against the inevitable storms of life. True healing requires returning to your Fitrah, your original uncorrupted blueprint.
Absolutely.
The Quran actually cites the ultimate saving grace as achieving a qalbun salim, a pure, sound heart. And all the data suggests that is exactly where true mental health begins.
And that leaves us with a final thought to carry forward. If your daily emotional habits, your responses to stress, and your cultivated character traits are actively writing the biological blueprint not just for your own future, but for the epigenetic code of your children and grandchildren, what is the one virtue you are going to intentionally rewire in your brain starting today?
That is a powerful, profound question to leave you with. We want to thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. And if you want to explore this further, we warmly invite you to read the full, comprehensive article on this exact topic over at meaningoflife.coach to continue your own journey of inner healing. Keep questioning, keep digging, and remember, you aren't just a machine to be hacked. You have an incredible innate blueprint waiting to be fulfilled. Catch you next time.